Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, on behalf of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, let me welcome all of you for the panel discussion on National Financial Inclusion Strategy. And today we have many respected invitees being present at the Central Bank, and also we are reaching a wide audience via Zoom and the official Facebook page of Central Bank, where this event is being live streamed. And most of you are already aware, this National Financial Inclusion Strategy, it was launched today morning and was presented to Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa, Prime Minister of Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka and Minister of Finance, by Deshamanya Professor W.D. Lakshman, Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka. This launch was graced by the presence of Honorable Ajith Nivard Cabral, State Minister of Money and Capital Market and State Enterprise Reforms, His Excellency David Olley, Australian High Commissioner to Sri Lanka and Maldives, and Ms. Amina Arif, Country Head of International Finance Corporation for Sri Lanka and Maldives. And any one of you can access this strategy document right now via official website of Central Bank of Sri Lanka. This National Financial Inclusion Strategy strives towards a financially inclusive Sri Lanka with an aspiring vision, better quality inclusion for better lives. That's the aspiring vision of this document, this whole plan. And this was developed after multi-stakeholder engagement came from various public and private sector enterprises, institutions across the economy. So in line with this launch, with the purpose of bringing in different perspectives to a single platform, this panel discussion has been initiated. And we have an expert panel which consists of 6 respected panelists. Now let me warmly welcome all of them and introduce to the audience. Honorable Ajith Nivard Cabral, State Minister, Money and Capital Markets and State Enterprise Reforms. Deshamanya Professor W.D. Lakshman, Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Mr. Chanda De Silva, General Manager, Chief Executive Officer of Lanka Clear Private Limited. Mr. J.P.R. Karunaratne, Assistant Governor, Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Ms. Samadini Kiriwandeniya, Managing Director, Sanasa International Private Limited. Mr. M. Ramamurthy, Director General, Planning of State Ministry of Samurdhi, Household Economy, Microfinance, Self-Employment, Business Development, and Underutilized State Resources Development. And this panel discussion will be moderated by Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne. He is the Chair Professor of Business Economics from Department of Business Economics in Faculty of Management and Finance at University of Colombo. He is also the Chairman of Institute of Policy Studies, and also the President of Japanese Graduates Alumni Association of Sri Lanka and Vice President of Sri Lanka Economics Association. So without further ado, let me invite Senior Professor H.D. Karunaratne to commence the panel discussion. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for entrusting this task for me. Very good day for everyone. Suba dawasak siyaluma denata. I think this financial inclusive strategy, National Financial Inclusive Strategy, is launching in all 3 languages. So therefore, you are free to express your views in all 3 languages. It is the inclusiveness in our country. Of course, we know this first ever National Financial Inclusion Strategy of Sri Lanka launched in the morning today at 10:30 in this Central Bank building, aiming to facilitate provision of more accessible financial service for individuals and enterprises, facilitating more things in Sri Lanka. So we know that particularly financial inclusion is very important for poverty reduction as well as facilitate the day-to-day economic activities. So we know this National Financial Inclusion Strategy, Central Bank has formulated with consultative process with all stakeholders in the country as well as outside the country. Globally, we know financial inclusion has become more and more valuable concept. There are 4 pillars they have identified in this policy framework. Number 1 is digital finance and payments. Number 2, micro, small and medium-sized enterprise finance. Number 3, consumer protection. Number 4, financial literacy and capacity building. In line with these 4 objectives, 4 pillars, I would like to invite our panel members to express their views. Here today, we are organizing this panel as 2 rounds. The first round, we will ask questions and we will get their views on this National Financial Inclusive Strategy, as well as how it is important for Sri Lanka. In line with that, I would like to start with Honorable Minister. The first question is on financial inclusion serves as a driver of economic growth. How is it important in government policy perspective?
See, I think consecutive governments have been consistently looking at embracing all its people within the economic sphere. So in that sense, our government is no different, and we have been conscious of the fact that there are lots of people who need to be brought into the group, as it were, which are financially stable. In that sense, a lot of things need to be done. In my view, sometimes we talk about the financial inclusion and we think of it as provision of loans or giving some equity. That alone is not sufficient. If you just imagine a situation, Professor, you would see that there are many instances where people have started a business, but the business cannot continue because they are getting into some difficulty. And some of those difficulties may be that they are of their own, but others may be outside their scope. So which means that there is another dimension to financial inclusion. Financially, people have to be given the platform in order to do their work in a sound manner. So I think that's where the government as well as the central bank comes in, where they have to prepare the groundwork where people can do business. I'll give you an example. If you have a 3-wheeler for which you are funding, and then the man takes this 3-wheeler and then he is ready to have hires. But if the country people cannot afford to go in the 3-wheeler, then he has no hires. So one of the fundamentals of that whole equation is that there must be a set of people who are also having money, who can pay for it, for the services that those who are providing the service can be given their reward. So that needs to be done. Then at the same time, the infrastructure needs to be done, the soft infrastructure as well as the hard infrastructure. Now, for example, if you take a person who is looking at becoming financially empowered, he needs to know how to run a business, or he needs to have some skill which will give him the opportunity to then become financially included. At the same time, the need to have the infrastructure in the hard infrastructure. He must have roads, he must have a telephone, he must have the ability to have water in his premises. So all those factors are also extremely important. If you remember, in the years 2006 to 2014, there was a massive concentration on the development of roads as well as in providing electricity to people. Now that is part of financial inclusion also. Yes. Because if you were to give people the ability to empower themselves, the balance structures also have to be put in place. So I think the government's role is to ensure that all these outside factors are taken care of, not just only the provision of the money. You need to have people to have the ability to do their business. So our government also, if you look at the vistas of prosperity and splendor which has been set out by the president, you would see that there is a lot of consciousness on that. When you say people-centric economy, that means people should be able to enjoy these facilities in order to be financially empowered and financially included. So in that sense, you would have seen a lot of steps being taken by our government, where we are looking at water services being provided, we are looking at the roads, about 100,000 kilometers of roads being developed so that people can get about their work. We are looking at some impediments to business in 14 of our districts in our country. We see human-elephant conflict. So those need to be managed, those need to be addressed. So that part of the work that is being done by our government is part of our policy in making people empowered. So going forward, those will be continued. The necessary investments in that will be done. And at the same time, we have to make sure that people have access to capital as well. I think that's where you come in, because you are very conscious of that, to see that people get loans at reasonable rates, that people have access to equity. Just a few days ago, I was approached by the chartered accountants and those from the AT, where they had set up a very fine service where they are providing the consultancy services to a group, to any small and medium sector entrepreneur, to hold their hand during a certain period. So now we are trying to tie that up with, if those services are being provided, tie it up with banks or equity, to also provide them with equity. Now these need to be done on a consistent basis. These need to be continued. So if we can do that, we will find that there will be larger groups of people who are able to become better businessmen, to be able to contribute better. So that will be the thrust of the government's policy and the policy framework that we would be introducing and also continuing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Then going in line with that, I would like to move into Deshamanya Professor W.D. Lakshman, Governor of the Central Bank. Why should the Central Bank take interest in playing the leading role in the National Financial Inclusive Strategy of Sri Lanka?
The simplest answer to a question like this is to be seen in the fact that the Central Bank is the leading institution in the entire financial sector. So various activities are undertaken by the Central Bank in order to improve the conditions of macroeconomic conditions in the country, and also to improve the conditions of the people. But the effectiveness of almost all these activities depends on how well the people understand the activities that are undertaken by the Central Bank, and how well they can participate in these activities in such a way that the Central Bank action provides the kind of results that are expected out of it. So in that sense, I think Central Bank has taken an initiative which is quite understandably its due. Now, for a long period of time in Sri Lanka, we have been talking about this subject, sometimes using different words. In the earlier days, we were simply taking into account some measures like how many bank officers or how many bank officers per certain number of people in the country. We thought by increasing the bank officers per certain number of people, there will be greater inclusiveness in financial things, and also greater financial literacy among the people. Gradually going along, now we are at the moment talking about financial inclusion, looking at, on the one hand, the financial literacy of the people, and on the other hand, we are also looking at how people could be actively, how people could be made to actively participate in financial activities. Now, in that sense, it is, I think, the central bank's function to facilitate these things, improve the conditions affecting the people's financial inclusiveness. Another point which comes to my mind is that currently when we are talking about economic and social development of people, we are concerned about how inclusively the social and economic development we are talking about goes down to the people. If people, groups of people who are living in distant areas are not going to be included in this, then obviously whatever the central bank tries to do in collaboration with the banking sector and other financial institutions is unlikely to be achieved as the people do not understand or people cannot effectively participate in these activities. Take, for example, the many incidents you sometimes read about in newspapers. People without adequate knowledge go and get into utter financial difficulties by trying to deal with unscrupulous financial institutions. Having gone there expecting that they would be able to get a very large income from their savings. Sometimes these people are promising incomes as much as a certain percentage, say 5%, 10% per month. And people not realizing that how can an organization pay that kind of rent, that kind of interest, without substantial profit-making investments on their part. They go and invest in these organizations or put money in, deposit in this organization, get into trouble. And how many of them eventually come to the central bank to get assistance? This, over the last few months I was here, I have come across many instances of this nature. Again, why should a central bank get into this? Because we think that by improving financial literacy, financial inclusiveness, people could be prevented from getting into unnecessary financial difficulties of this nature without adequate knowledge. So these are a few thoughts which come to my mind. We can come back into the discussion later on with other points.
Thank you very much. Actually, once Nobel laureate Milton Friedman said that money is equivalent to blood of the human body. We know in an economy, if we take the economy as a human body, blood is the money. So that therefore we need money, that monetary financial matters going across all the sections in the economy. So in today's panel, we represent the government, of course, public sector, private sector, all the corners are in this panel. So let me to move into the next speaker on Mr. Channadi Silva, CEO, Lanka Clear. First question, what I would like to ask you, how do you define the role of digital finance in the financial inclusion landscape of Sri Lanka?
Thank you. Pardon me for using a piece of paper, because I want to put some statistics in front of you. So that's why I don't remember all those offhand. So before we get into so what is digital finance? Basically, access to financial services using digital channels, which is simply sort of can be a definition of that, right? So in order to do that, we first need to understand what the digital landscape of the country is. So when we look at digital landscape, we have 21.4 million. These are actually statistics from January 2021. 21.46 million population in the country, out of which 18.8% is urban, which means 81% of the population is rural. So that's one fact. Second one is mobile penetration. This may be number of SIMs, DGTRC is here. 30.4 million SIMs issued in the market, which is 142% of the population. Then we have 10.9 million internet users, which is 50.8% of the population. And we have 7.9 million active social media users, which is 36.8% of the population. So when you are talking about digital finance, the low-hanging fruit, the first to adopt are the people who are actually using digital right now. You try to go and convert somebody who doesn't even use a phone, getting them into digital is the most difficult part. So first, we can look at this 37% who are active social media users. But that's not the point. So that is the digital landscape. But the other side is, let's compare this, because what happens is we try to bring digital just because it works in another country and we think that it will work here. It doesn't work because it's a context. So let's take the same similar example in Thailand. So in Thailand, the population is 70 million, which is 3.5 times of Sri Lanka. But 52% of that population is urban. And the mobile connection penetration is 130%, whereas in Sri Lanka it's 142%. And in Thailand, the internet penetration is 70%, whereas in Sri Lanka it's 51%. But the difference comes in active social media users. 80% of Thailand population is active social media users, whereas in Sri Lanka it's 37%. So there is a difference. So just because unless we go rural, we will never go to digital finance and digital inclusivity in Sri Lanka, because we will not cover 81% of the population. So it's very simple, very clear. The second point I want to bring is the language usage, right? When we look at statistics on ATMs, ATM usage, almost 65% of the ATMs are used in local languages, Sinhala and Tamil, menus. So unless we have all this technology available in local languages, all three, we will not get these people included into the system, digital. You may shout about, we are having all these apps, but they will not adopt because we are dealing with money. And click of a wrong button because you don't understand the language, it puts fear into people of using technology. So we need to ensure that they are comfortable in using technology. So that's the second side. So having looked at the digital landscape, so what would be the potential benefits? I would like to address it in 3 areas. One is the economic saving of this. Because if you look at the payments bulletin, Q3 bulletin is out from Central Bank, the currency in circulation is in Q3 2020 is 775 billion. And regional statistics done by regional players basically estimates it almost costs about 1.5% of GDP to a country to maintain cash, which is to print, distribute, clean, recycle, provide security to maintain this cash in circulation or currency in circulation. Compare this with what Sri Lanka spends on education. I think Honorable Minister can correct me. In 2018, the other numbers I couldn't find, the spend on education was 2.1% of GDP, entire education. Maybe last 2 years it may be close to 3%, maybe less than 3%. But we are spending 1.5% on cash. So imagine if we can shift 30% of the population into digital, we are going to save 0.5% GDP, which can be used for social welfare, Samruddhi programs, whatever. This is waste of GDP. So that's one economic saving that we can achieve using digital finance. The second one is the foreign exchange saving. We are struggling, especially with COVID, inflow of foreign exchange. Now we have had, different types of international payment modes available in Sri Lanka for a couple of decades. Now we are losing almost, more than in excess of 6 billion rupees a year Because every transaction which is local, which is more than 90% of the transactions are between two local financial institutes, we are paying in dollars to these international players. So if we use these channels that we have already established, which we will cover in the second phase, we are going to save in excess of 6 billion. And this is going to increase, especially with the increase of usage of digital, and all these international schemes are used, card schemes, the payment modes used, we are going to use more and more foreign exchange. So that is an economic saving when we are struggling with foreign exchange right now, which we can achieve. The third aspect is actually, I think, Honorable Minister and Governor touched on, people do not have access to credit. Why? They have income, they have revenue, but they deal in cash. This money never goes into a bank account, and bank does not know how much earning a person has to give that person credit. Some of us who work, we have a salary slip, the salary goes to the bank, they know our income, they can give a loan. But most of these guys, the 81% of the population which is urban, they don't deposit money. They have a bank account, they deal in, cash out. So bank has no way of, take a three-wheeler guy, 50 to 60,000 earning a month, can't get a loan because he never put the money into the bank. But imagine if this money goes and hits a bank account over a 6 months period, they start building a credit history. The bank is going to understand that the credit history of the person, and probably the three-wheeler guy will be granted 100,000 loan. So that's in an inclusion. That's getting this, because the more and more cash sitting out of the financial ecosystem, where even if they have cash, they will not have access to credit, which is a huge social problem. So alternative they have is go to a loan shark, get a loan at 10% interest a day, and sell the three-wheeler to settle that. They are in dire financial straits, especially the women. But if we can get them into the formal financial system using digital, we are going to solve a massive economic problem or social problem. So I'll come to on the second phase, the balance part.
Thank you very much. As Mr. Chana De Silva emphasized that we know digital literacy and financial literacy relationship, it's very important. And apart from that, there are some other components also in modern definition of literacy. Language literacy is there, of course networking literacy is there. There are a lot of things related to financial literacy also today. Actually, we need to investigate more and more. Of course, we know that as he correctly pointed out, we all carry mobile phones. I think majority has about more than 50,000 mobile phones. But the issue is that for what purpose we use this mobile phone. Some are having with more than 100,000 mobile phone, using only for taking calls and giving calls, that's all. But actually if we can link it to financial literacy, or if we can link into economic activities, that is another effort we have to do that. Whether we can use these mobile phones for digitalized world to the economic activities. Thank you very much. Then we will move into another central bank officer, assistant governor, Mr. Karunaratne. What is the current scope of financial consumer protection of the country?
Okay. Let me start with saying, if you look at general products and services, there are a lot of laws governing general products and services. But when it comes to the financial services and products, one key problem is the nature of product is a little bit complex. So if I come back to the previous speakers, why people are reluctant to bank with, do banking business and credit, the major reason has been they are scared of protection, because it involves a lot of legal contracts, not like other products and services. So that itself has made, especially the people in the poor, in the rural areas, to engage in business with banks and other financial services institutions. So in that context, key regulators, including central bank, has come up with a lot of customer protection regulations during the past so many years. Some have in the form of directions, some have also built into the laws. Now, in the context of consumer protection of financial services, in the NFI strategy, as you said at the beginning, we have identified it as a separate pillar. So we started saying there are 4 pillars to the whole strategy: MSME finance and consumer protection, digital finance, and financial literacy. So it is very important that to ensure the financial inclusiveness, to address the customer protection area. So there now your question is about the scope. So I would like to focus on about a couple of areas. Now one area has been equitable treatment. Now the previous speaker said that getting a loan from a bank or other formal institution is pretty difficult. So that has led the informal organization to reach those rural informal sector people and also less educated people. So that has itself led to serious crisis. If you look at so many issues during past so many years we hear, and also complaint received because inability to access to the formal financial institutions. So there it is very important to address the issue of equitable treatment. Now, you see when it comes to a bank, getting a loan by a poor person is fairly difficult. Even the processes are little cumbersome. So that is one area. Okay. Then fair market practices. It's very important. The practices adopted by the formal institutions are very fair. Sometimes different treatments are adopted. Thirdly, now as I said at the beginning, the products and services are different. So there are a lot of contractual engagement, not like buying or selling a normal product and services. Now, when taking a loan, customer is required to enter into agreement where average people don't understand the terms and conditions. And even the banks and other formal institutions are not educating the customers enough to identify the risk and benefit of the particular product or service. So they are compelled to even sign document without knowledge what they are doing. If you look at now complaints with respect to the interest, at the end of the day, bank charges a very high interest once the customer start defaulting. Then the general complaint is that I agreed to pay, let's say 10%, at the end I couldn't pay 3 or 4 installments, and bank started asking you to pay some 14, 15 and so on. But of course I know the director bank's question also here, but there are certain set guidelines by the central bank, but people are not aware of this. So that is very important relevant disclosures and the education. Customer education plays a great role in the context of customer protection.
Yes,
so
actually, yes, actually the customer protection, partly it is legal, as you pointed out. And of course, there is a psychological part as well, where we have not communicated very well. So therefore, customer doesn't know about that. So there is a area where we can focus this financial inclusion on the communication to the people. I think it is very important. Then moving into private sector contributions, I would like to go to Samadhani Kiriwandeniya on how instrumental is high level of financial inclusion in making the macrofinance project successful.
Yeah. First of all, I like to thank for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share some of these thoughts from the practitioner's point of view, I guess, since I've been with the inclusive finance forum and inclusive finance area for almost more than half of my life. So I have been listening and engaging and studying and researching on the issues of inclusive finance in Sri Lanka from the community's point of view as well as from a banker's point of view. And now that I'm out of the banking industry, also looking from the other side, from researchers and investors' point of view also, to see how inclusive finance can be better mandated in Sri Lanka, and the strategy that is being presented as the high-level strategy of the government and of the central bank, whether how suitable this is to push some of the agendas that have been initiated by the communities. So this is, I think, the area where I am asked to make my opinion. And I think when you are looking at the inclusive finance in Sri Lanka, like Channa said, if 80% of the country's population is still rural, And if you look at some of the latest research that has been done by Verite and other institutes on the post-COVID situation in Sri Lanka, the economic situation of the normal, like, MSME sector people who are demanding to be included more in the economy, in the value chains, in more decision-making, levels in the country. I think it is at a high level. If the high-level inclusive strategy needs to be effective and relevant for the country, I think everyone who is involved needs to really ask the question, not how to do this, but why to do this. I think this question we failed to ask 10 years back when we were pushing and promoting microfinance. And today, people are committing suicide because of microfinance, and microfinance industry has been backlashed so much in Sri Lanka. But in 2007, after post-COVID situation, when the microfinancing was expanding in the country, we already had the experiences of Bangladesh and other countries which showed experiences of bad inclusive strategies. And I think we can learn, we should have learned from it, but unfortunately now after 10 years, we are in the same situation that Bangladesh was with the microfinance 10 years back. So if this inclusive strategy of the country needs to be inclusive, I think we really need to ask, why do we need to have an inclusive strategy in the country? Why do we need to include and provide access to the 80% of the population that has less opportunity to be included and access financial market? Is it to get better benefits on IT companies or investors' balance sheets, or is it to make sure that the people have more nutritious food on the table, more productive land that can be owned by farmers, whether the youth have better access to better quality education, whether women can have more safe spaces to live, or is it for some other non-related parties' interests that we are promoting an inclusive strategy? So this is a question I think we really have to ask, because when we were talking in the microfinance sector, which was one strategy previously that was adopted in order to provide more inclusivity in finance, we failed to ask this question. We talked about how best we can do microfinancing, how better we can promote platforms and technology, how big the volumes can be grown, how big a balance sheet can be grown, but we failed to ask, why are we doing this as a country? Why are we enabling more and more microfinance organizations to provide access in the name of inclusivity, but then not being responsible, right? So I think since all of us are, I think most of the people who are here are probably the people who are driving the strategy in the room, and most of the people who are listening might be the people who will be benefiting or affected by the strategy. So I think as a team, we really need to ask, why? Why are we pushing this now in this country as a strategy? So that is one. The second one is, if we are to promote microfinancing, other than using enabling technologies, other than providing funds from the treasury to the financing institutes, I think we really need to figure out what models that we are promoting in the name of inclusive financing, right? Because that again, I think Sri Lanka, as a country, I think we should have promoted better models in that inclusive finance initiative. We had more cooperative models, more inclusive models, where people could have done better than just providing small-scale financing. So we should be looking at models just as much as the platforms, right? Through the platforms, what are the models that we are promoting? That is one. Then the second one I think we need to really look into is the process in which that we are pushing this inclusive finance mandate. I think if a financial inclusion needs to be there, the people who are going to be included should be included. They should not be asked to react to an inclusive finance strategy. Inclusive financing mandate should be designed, developed, implemented by the people who are included. So in that sense, I think policy-making people, regulatory people, and the financing people, technology facilitators, as well as the people who will benefit from this or affected by this, should be given an opportunity to tell what kind of a life they need to live in, what kind of a financing process they should be involved at, how simple or complex it should be. So I think in the inclusive financing discussions, we have seen that most of the times we tend to look at the community in a distant level and make policies of programs and looking at the community as a homogeneous group. But communities are not homogeneous groups. Communities are having their own aspirations, they have their own diversities. So just by providing a simple product or program and then channeling it through a platform can have better and low cost return on investment on the investors. But it would not necessarily deliver the impact at the beneficiary level. So I think we really need to be mindful and take the community as a homogeneous group, treat them in a decent manner rather than thinking that their needs can be served simply by a small capital injection. Right? That cannot be done. And we have learned it through the cooperative financing. We have seen the capital or the financing is the last thing that needs to go if we are thinking about inclusive finance. It should be the last thing. We will talk about it in the next discussion, I think. Before that, there are so many other preparedness that needs to be done, not only at the recipient level, but at the deliverer's level. Because one thing I have seen is in most of the regulatory structures or even as delivery financing structures, we fail to understand our customer. When it comes to a regulator fails to understand the deliverer fails to understand the beneficiary. So we end up not knowing the customer, but delivering something and making the entire nation unhappy. So I think if we are going to get it properly inclusive, we need to really understand who these customers that we are walking on this journey with, and be humble enough to learn from each other so that we can have a better financial inclusion in the country. And closing it, let me say, like you said, finance is the blood, yes, but finance can make or break a nation also.
Yes, so. Thank you very much. And there, of course, we know a lot of issues related to education, and inclusiveness is going with that one. So there is a kind of nexus you can see between financial inclusion and financial literacy. Mr. Can you elaborate that part? That?
Yes, good afternoon to everybody. First of all, I must say that there is a close linkage between the financial literacy and the financial inclusion. Because the financial literacy is considered as a demand side of the financial inclusions. Because then we have to balance it. The supply is more or the demand side is more, then it will create the problem. And see, in Sri Lanka, the inclusion level of the inclusion is very high, but the literacy rate, financial literacy rate is low. So then what will happen is then the financial institutions, they will push or misuse the customers because they don't have the knowledge that much to get or select or trade off between the different product, investment product or loan or anything. So they have the problem on that one. then even in that time, the customers or people will go or get the credit or another thing without considering their repayment capacity. So this type of thing will a big problem will create. So we should definitely give higher consideration for improving the financial literacy rate in Sri Lanka. But if you see that the inclusion is enhanced through the technologies nowadays, as the previous consumer. But if you see the IT literacy rate in Sri Lanka is 35%. So how hard to improve the financial literacy in Sri Lanka is not an easy thing. So there should be a lot of institutions out there. We should have the collaborative actions. The Ministry of Samruddhi have around 1,074 Samruddhi banks, and also the RDB, Rural Development Bank, also now work with this ministry, and they are also having around 276 service points. So all these institutional should make use to educate the people, especially on the financial literacy. Otherwise, what will happen is that people or individual become victims of the financial fraud or other thing. And also individual as well as the individual make wrong decisions, and that will affect his lifelong the activities or the financial successes. So these are the things considered, and all the ministries together jointly, or all the relevant institutions should have a common strategy to educate the people on financial matters.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, how to earn money, how to save money, how to invest money, how to grow with the money, how money will work, bring money for the people. So financial literacy is the most important component in the financial inclusion concept. So in the National Financial Inclusion Strategy is timely, important launch made by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. And we know that Central Bank has been taking many actions to improve the financial literacy at grassroots level with the collaborative institutions and stakeholders in the country. We have a long way to go. We need to improve our financial literacy, taking various steps. In that line, particularly when it comes to financial inclusion, I would like to get the second round on very short, maybe within 2 minutes or 1 minute answer, or what you want, you can express there also. I would like to get from the Honorable Minister your views on how the government can promote this financial inclusion strategy to the Sri Lanka.
See, as I said at the first round, government's role is to ensure that people have better way of doing business and to make them have opportunities. We should not run away with the thought that financial inclusion can occur if we just give people money.
Yes.
That's the general feeling that people have. If we give them money, then we have done our work, everybody is happy, and then we have discharged our responsibility. That is not the case, because take the instance of the extreme case, somebody wins a lottery. 99% of the people who win lotteries get into trouble. Why? Because they don't know how to manage it. So the financial inclusion is not just providing money to them, providing the rest of the facilities as well as the understanding to deal with it. So that's where we have to play several roles. So that means you have to make sure that there is enough business opportunities, that he is having training, he understands what business is, he understands the nature of the difference between turnover and profit perhaps. All these things are important factors, and many more, in ensuring that people can have a sustainable financial inclusion.
Yeah.
what we sometimes miss out is we provide a ad hoc or a sudden financial inclusion, which doesn't lead to the sustainable financial inclusion. People who are successors, who have been successful businessmen, have been successful because they have had a business model which is successful, and they have been diligently involved in that business model, and that's how that outcome is achieved. So if you really want to be successful in ensuring that people have been properly given the guidance, then we got to make sure that all those building blocks are put in place. If you don't have those building blocks in place and you have just one or two in place, then you won't achieve that goal. So whilst the central bank will play its role in ensuring that the transmission of the funds is there, so many other people, so many other institutions also need to play their roles. So while I commend you for this initiative, I would also like to see you working with so many other different partners. Today I see here, even in this forum, all are financial people. But financial inclusion is not only with financial people. That is why you need to have other agencies who are involved in training, other agencies who are involved in ensuring that the infrastructure is provided, other agencies that understand the sustainability of a program, all of them are also represented. So I would like to urge you to not abandon what you're doing, certainly continue doing that, but at the same time have the partnership going with other agencies who also will have to play a very key role if you want to have a sustainable financial inclusion. So a national strategy must necessarily be sustainable. We have to have people who are going into the outside world and doing business in a sustainable manner. You will have to play a role in ensuring that the macro fundamentals are stable. That's why I think the central bank's main role is to ensure that there is economic stability as well as economic and price stability as well as financial system stability, because those are the most important ingredients to ensure that the platform is laid. But at the same time, the other areas will also need to be nurtured, and to do that we have to get the partnership and the engagement of the others. So hopefully this initiative can be extended to the partnership with the others as well, and if you do that, then we would really achieve financial inclusion.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. Actually, what we need to go with other stakeholders. All stakeholders should contribute, and particularly this education and information, also very, very important. Now you see one of the areas where we today also cited that we still call 81% of Sri Lankans are rural. I think that rural definition is wrong. Even African countries now there are, I think, less than the rural population. So we need to change this urban-rural definitions in Sri Lanka and adopt it. I think there are many Pradeshia Sabha which should be considered as an urban area, but still we consider as a rural area. So information handling also we need to deal with, and the education, particularly from the primary education to secondary, tertiary, at least stories, small events, we should practice to develop the financial literacy and financial inclusion. As you pointed out, then I would like to move again to the central bank, governor of the central bank, how this financial inclusion will relate it to macroeconomic objectives which central bank going to achieve.
Beginning the second round, you mentioned 2 to 3 minutes per person.
Okay.
I also know that there was 1 hour or so time given for this entire activity. Anyway, let me say a few things in this second round. We have a tendency to break down human activities into areas, and in the economic study we used to consider real sector activities and the financial sector activities as separate things. We used a word called to describe this. The word is, I think, dualism, classical dualism sometimes they say. So in the examination of economic activities of a country, we first examine real sector economic activities, and then at the later stage introduce money into this, so finances into this. I think we should not be doing that. These are related, very closely related activities. So in this, the central bank, trying to achieve its macroeconomic objectives, we are used to saying price stability, financial sector stability, institutional stability. These are referred to as the central bank objectives, but to facilitate various other objectives, taking the entire system, economic system as a whole, not restricting to the financial sector activities. Financial sector activities taken as a path to achieve the greater objectives. So in that sense, we ought to be concerned about the financial integration, right? Financial inclusion of the society in our activities, because the more financially inclusive our people are, the greater effectiveness of central bank activities in achieving its macroeconomic objectives. This can be developed, this idea can be developed in various different ways. But let me give more time to other speakers and give you the opportunity to continue with the discussion. I have taken about 3 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I think the time is running, so therefore what we will do that we will get the views from these 4 speakers taking 2 minutes. If you can express your views on today's discussion.
Yeah, so I think one of the things I want to actually highlight is we are talking about digital finance, at least that's what I'm supposed to. So even though we have the instruments available, the penetration has been low. Actually, there have been traditional reasons. For example, we have 1.9 million, I mean, this is again, according to Q3 bulletin, payments bulletin of Central Bank, 1.9 million credit cards issued. 23 million in 2019, there were debit cards issued, but it's down to 18 million, maybe due to COVID, banks couldn't deliver the cards. Then we have 83,000 POS terminals, all little bit plus that. But the fact of the matter is average transactions per terminal a day has been less than 4, credit, debit put together. So what it also means is every supermarket probably has hundreds of transactions, and there are thousands of terminals with 0 transactions because people are not using, right, the terminals, even though people have 23 million debit cards in the market, right? So it's not being used, absolutely, right? So what are the reasons? One reason that we identified was the commission, the merchant discount rate that the banks were charging was high. It's 3 to 3.5%. For a MSME or a merchant who's making 5% profit out of a good, is he or she willing to partake 3.5% of profit to a bank? That's a non-starter. So they say, give me cash, I don't want card, right? So that's a non-starter then and there. The second one, easy access to cash. You go out of the house, there's an ATM, there's a branch of a bank, you have easy access to cash. We try to replicate what happened in M-Pesa in Africa, where the mobile money went through the roof. But in Sri Lanka, you have easy access, where in Africa, you have to go 100 miles to get to an ATM to get cash. But in Sri Lanka, you walk out of the house, you get access to cash. So it's not the same context. So our mobile money didn't pick up, obvious reasons. I mean, we didn't look at the context, right? That's what the mistake we did. Then the payment cycle breakdown. For example, we want to make payment to the 3-wheeler guy using a mobile, but the 3-wheeler guy wants to buy vegetables to go to the Sunday fair. He has to go to an ATM and withdraw cash because the lady at the Sunday fair doesn't accept card or doesn't accept mobile payments, right? So the cycle breaks down. Then the last one is fear of taxes. Obviously, we know these small merchants, right? They keep 2 books. because they fear if their income is known by the government and the banking community, they'll get taxed. But obviously now the tax brackets have increased, 250,000 a month up to 3 million, they don't get taxed. They are not aware. So they still fear that if they come into the formal system, they'll get taxed. So these are some of the things that we need to educate. So in order to overcome, I'll just quickly run through a few things that I think Central Bank has done. One of the things to address merchants, get merchants into the system, the Lanka QR. 2 decades of cards, we have only had 83,000 merchants. But few months of Lanka QR, we have brought more than 150,000 merchants onto the platform, right? So which is a huge, significant jump. Then we have launched a platform called Just Pay, which is for in-app payments. We have had 1.6 billion value of transactions every month happening. It's increasing. Small value, 1,000 rupee, 2,000 rupee transaction using mobile phones. Then we have had other area is government payments. Customs was open 24/7, 365 days a year. Banks were open only until 3 and not on weekends. So you couldn't clear the goods even though the customs was open. So we implemented government payments via online to customs. Now more than 11 billion worth of payments are going through even during weekends. So which is another inclusivity part, right? Then other area is peer-to-peer payments, person to person. How do I pay my plumber? How do I pay my newspaper guy? How do I pay my mason, right? So peer-to-peer, other countries, they have Zelle and other payments. So we have launched an initiative called Payment Exchange Name, where just by using a mobile number and a nickname, you can send money, right? So that's another area. Last but not least, the cards. I touched on that we are losing billions. So with Central Bank, we introduced what we call National Card Scheme. Now, last week or 2 weeks ago, the cabinet approved this card is going to be the transport card. So there are 5,000 plus buses and 20,000 private buses. So this card, what happens is, it's all cash, right? Loss to the government is about 25 to 30% of revenue leakage because some of these guys don't give the cash back. They don't issue a ticket, right? But if you regulate that, then the government and the private sector is going to get that money, and you know the system is going to grow. So last but not least, all these activities put together has driven certain volume, but COVID-19 pandemic has grown that by 10 times. That's because people don't have access to cash. Curfew, you can't go out of the house. Curfew, you can't go to the bank. Only option is digital, stay at home, right? So that has driven. So I think it was more of a compelling reason, even though there were 99% bad things about COVID, there were few glimmer of hope for digital with COVID. So I think that has driven. So,
right, time is running. Let me ask other 3 panelists to summarize within 1 minute. So can I ask Samadhani first to summarize what you want to tell?
Yes, more than summarizing, I think I would like to say a few points in relation to financial inclusion again. One, I think, is that it would be really good for the people who are promoting the financial inclusion agenda to start looking at better integration in the financial value chain of the country. Why I am saying this is that I see that microfinanciers are talking among themselves, SME financiers are talking among themselves, corporate financiers are talking among themselves. Meanwhile, at every place, people do not necessarily know where their industries are heading. So for everyone to have a common understanding of what we are promoting when we are talking about agri-industry, when we are talking about apparel industry, when we are talking about any other industry, I think it is high time that we have better integration of the financial value chain of the country. That is one. Second, I think financial advisory service is a must, because in all the other countries where you have seen where the most inclusive looking financial economies, most financially inclusive looking economies have ended up having high level of investment but high level of indebtedness, especially because people lack the literacy. So financial advisory as a national strategy, I think, should be integrated and should be promoted and should be supported. So those are 2 things. The third, treat community not as a homogeneous group, again, as a diverse. So have better understanding of the needs of the women, needs of the farmers, needs of probably mid-sector business people and organize the inclusion accordingly based on their needs. So those are 3 things I think I would like the high level to take up.
Thank you very much. Then Mr. Ramamurthy.
I want to point out 2 things. One is there are many institutions in Sri Lanka. Already I told that the high level of inclusion is there, but the quality of the service, still there's a question. And also the cost of the product for the end users, how it is there, it need to be improved. And as I told that the previous panelists told that the what is called that the education was the microfinance, that's right, the advisory service, not only the financial literacy as well as the advisory service is the one of the important things. And I think last week we had that the one-stop centers to provide all the services to the end users to enhance their businesses or borrow in a better way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Karnaratna, anything just anything?
While the other players' engagement is also required, other than Honorable Minister said the financial players, from the context of consumer protection, especially the regulators' involvement is required. So central bank, SEC, insurance regulator, and so on. So basically, in the whole strategy, it has been identified the regulator's role, basically in 4 areas: the gaps in the existing regulatory framework, then identify those and strengthen those, and also addressing the existing dispute resolution framework, and also coming up with the new laws required to protect the customers.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your valuable contribution for all Honorable Minister and all other distinguished guests today. Actually, it was a live discussion. I think Central Bank has telecast this through the Facebook and even the Central Bank YouTube channel. So I think this is one of the very important event for the country because in advanced countries there are many opportunities to learn the financial literacy programs and activities, but in Sri Lanka it's limited. So Central Bank has taken a timely important event today. We wish that Central Bank will go into a very good stage with this financial inclusion national strategy. Thank you very much for all of us and particularly inviting me to moderate this today's discussion. Thank you. Thank you for participating.
Yes, with that, so if you can take a minute. With that, we have reached the end of today's panel discussion. Before winding up, there's a task we must undertake. A token of appreciation has been arranged to our esteemed panel and to the moderator also. For that, I'd like to invite Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Deshamane Professor W. Dilakshman, to hand over these token of appreciations to panelists and Professor Karunaratne.